Hello, welcome to Pips Talks. I'm Ariba Wasim, and today we're going to have a very interesting discussion with our guest. And I just want to tell you a little bit about our guest. She's Dr. Anne Lekuski, who is a senior researcher and an author of books. And we are going to talk about her book today. But before that, I'll ask her to introduce herself so you can know more about who she is.
Thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak here and for the introduction. So my name is Anne Lekuski, as was mentioned. I'm originally a historian. I received my PhD from University of Oslo in Norway. My field has always been the study of terrorism, especially the group called Al-Qaeda. So my PhD was about studying the relationship between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in the 1990s. And from there, I've since written two books about the history of Al-Qaeda, one that was published in 2017 that covered the history until 2001, until the 9/11 attacks. And now I'm publishing my second book this year, which is the topic of this talk, which covers the history of Al-Qaeda from 2001 until the death of Osama bin Laden in 2011.
So this is the book, and we're going to base our discussion on this. The title of the book is Al-Qaeda After 9/11, The War on Terror and the Decade of Demise. So I would like to ask Dr. Anna that what motivated you to write this book? And did you see any gaps in literature that you're seeking to fulfill through this book?
Yes, very much. Of course, a lot of books have already been written about Al-Qaeda. I started doing this research in 2018, and by then Al-Qaeda was not the main center of attention anymore in the world of terrorism. We had the group called ISIS, Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, that was taking all the attention pretty much because of their actions and their spectacular violence and so on in Iraq and Syria. So at the time I started thinking about this project, Al-Qaeda wasn't really, Al-Qaeda seemed to be a topic that's already been overstudied. So why should I write another book about it? The main reason was that I got access to a lot of new primary sources, that is documents in Arabic, explaining the inner workings of Al-Qaeda. And those documents were from the Abbottabad raid carried out by U.S. Special Forces in 2011, and that is the operation that killed Osama bin Laden here in Pakistan. And during that raid, the U.S. gathered a lot of documents from Osama bin Laden's house and took them with them back to the U.S. And many years later, in November 2017, there was a decision in the US to release a lot of these documents. So they were put online for researchers like me to study. So I started reading them and found that there was still an untold story about Al-Qaeda in these documents. So that's how the project started and the motivation. And I also thought, a lot of books have been written about Al-Qaeda, but they have typically focused on the story and the person of Osama bin Laden himself. And also after 2001, many books focused on conflict areas like Iraq and the group called Al-Qaeda in Iraq. But not much was really known and gathered together of information about what was called an Al-Qaeda Central, or the senior leadership of Al-Qaeda that was based in the Afghanistan-Pakistan border areas after 2001. And the documents from the Abbottabad house of bin Laden revealed a lot about this story and about the inner workings and inner dynamics of the senior leadership of Al-Qaeda.
Okay, that's really fascinating. And it's a really good book. I've started reading it, but I wasn't able to finish it.
That's okay, you got it yesterday. So,
So how does this book build on your previous work, Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, or how does it differ from your previous work?
Yes, it's story-wise or chronology-wise, it builds directly on that previous work, which ends the story in 2009 with the 9/11 attacks. And I do not write anything about what happened after. So that was always on my mind, that sometime I want to look at what happened after 9/11, from the US-led attack on Afghanistan, the fall of the Taliban, and when Al-Qaeda's leadership fled across the border into Pakistan. Some of them settled in the border areas between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and others went to Iran and other places. So it was always on my mind to start this story from here, because that's where I left it off. I guess the main difference is that the sources I have this time, the primary sources that I use, there are much more of them, and they are much more relevant. They are really the personal letters and the personal writings of Al-Qaeda leaders. So they give a snapshot into the thoughts of the Al-Qaeda leaders at a particular historical moment in time. And in my previous project, I also used documents, for example, documents that were found in Al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan. But those were more administrative type documents that talked about the administration of training camps, the setting up of training courses, and there were letters also between leaders, but there weren't many letters from senior leaders. There were more the day-to-day operations of Al-Qaeda, of its training, and of its relationship to the Taliban sometimes. But now the sources for this book are much richer and much more interesting, giving more information that helps me to tell this story.
So your book relies heavily on the Abbottabad documents. So did you face any challenges while you were working in accessing them or translating them or understanding them for your book?
Yes, the sources have challenges because they are computer files mostly, and some of them are also scanned, like photographs of handwritten letters. The main challenge is that many of them they do not contain a date, and they lack information about the sender and receiver. And sometimes we also don't know if a document, although I can see it's written by Osama bin Laden, but it could be either a draft from his computer that was never sent, or it could be something that was sent. So all the documents are from bin Laden's house, but I do not have documents from the other leaders, the ones who were receiving these letters. So I can't really compare what was actual communication and what was drafts just left on a computer. So that was the state of this collection of sources. It was also not organized in any way when the CIA released them. So I had to go through all the files and organize them myself. And it was a very tedious work that took many years, because not only I had to make my own chronology of these documents and deduct like sender, receiver, and date, and so on, but also just to find and separate out the interesting documents from everything else that you typically find on a person's computer, which is everything like downloaded web pages, articles, media articles, and thousands and thousands of files that were not so relevant, right? So I had to find the personal communications mainly, and to make a chronology of that. And also, in addition to that, there were some difficulties. Sometimes one has to interpret what a person means when they say something. Sometimes code words are used instead of saying things straight out. And I couldn't solve all the puzzles. So there are still puzzles to me, but I think I gathered enough knowledge about the context these documents were written in, that I could write a coherent story that I hope is, it's as close to the truth as possible.
So you just mentioned that there were puzzles. So do you plan on writing another book similar to this, which will unfold those puzzles?
I could still write many books based on these sources, because not everything can fit in a book, and there were specifically a couple of chapters and a couple of topics that I had to leave out because I didn't have time to include them in the book. So I think my next writing projects related to these documents would be to write those about those topics that I left out, rather than going back to the small details. Because I think even though small details were missing, I think I succeeded in telling the larger story. Since I'm a historian, I'm trying to understand the broader question of what became of Al-Qaeda after 2001, how was it affected by the war on terror, and why did Al-Qaeda ultimately lose its influence in the world to other groups like ISIS? So some of those questions I could still answer. Yeah.
I was reading your book yesterday and I noticed that you start off by defining Al-Qaeda. So have you been able to pinpoint a concrete definition of Al-Qaeda, or is that still in flux?
Yeah, that will be a continuous discussion. It's like a definition of terrorism. There's always many definitions and many opinions about what this phenomenon is. As for Al-Qaeda, my understanding of Al-Qaeda has increased over the years. But I've been studying Al-Qaeda now for about 20 years, if I count my master thesis work. That started 20 years ago. And I still learn new things about Al-Qaeda and how one should understand Al-Qaeda and what kind. I think I prefer to refer to Al-Qaeda as an organization or a group that had, it had a leader and it had an internal structure, at least for many number of years, maybe not in the latest period. But when it was led by Osama bin Laden, they had a structure, they had rules and procedures for how to appoint officials that had various responsibilities. So I see it as an organization around Osama bin Laden. And then it also became a sort of a coalition of groups from the Middle East and North Africa after 2001, because you had the various groups like Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and you had an Al-Qaeda affiliate in Yemen, and then you had a group in Algeria, the GSPC, that changed their name to Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. So Al-Qaeda had its senior leadership in Pakistan, and then they had these affiliates, as we call them, across the Muslim world. And that was also, there was a procedure behind appointing or naming those affiliates that I see as part of being an organization. Although the bonds between them were quite weak sometimes, and they were not. It was not a command and control relationship, but it was. But there was an organizational idea behind all that. And today, I think it's very hard to talk about Al-Qaeda today, because the organization that I describe in my book, it's almost all gone, because the leaders were they were all killed or arrested from the historical original generation of Al-Qaeda leaders that started out in the 80s and early 90s. So there is currently a lack of historical continuity in Al-Qaeda, although there are still groups in the world that call themselves Al-Qaeda. So I'm still not sure how to describe the current phenomenon that a lot of people still talk about Al-Qaeda, but to me it's not the Al-Qaeda that I talk about in my research, because that is a historical phenomenon now that has passed, I would say, with the killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri in 2022, I think. So after his death, there hasn't been a clear organizational structure like it was in the past.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the book also uses the word franchises. So do you think the franchises still exist, or they have also frizzled out?
Yes, the franchises still exist. Some of them still exist, and they still use the name Al-Qaeda. There are about 2 franchises, I think, that still use the name Al-Qaeda, one in Yemen, one in Algeria. They are weak. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, that is the group based in Yemen, is probably the one that is still kind of carrying on Al-Qaeda's ideological banner in the most clear way. Whereas Al-Qaeda in Algeria was always its own local phenomenon that grew into a group that later took the name Al-Qaeda and then was severely, severely harmed by like counterterrorism measures, and is now a very small phenomenon. And then you have others that would be described as affiliates that do not carry the name Al-Qaeda, like Al-Shabaab in Somalia. And you have JNIM, a group in Mali and like the Sahel region in West Africa. And then you also have groups that left Al-Qaeda, which is very interesting. So the group that now has taken power in Syria, that is led by Ahmed al-Sharaa. He was in the past a member of an Al-Qaeda affiliate, Jabhat al-Nusra. But that group announced at one point that they leave Al-Qaeda because they want to, be more of a local group. They don't want to be, they didn't say this publicly, but because they don't want to be associated with the Al-Qaeda name. They want to, because they have more of a local project. So that's the general situation today with the Al-Qaeda affiliates. I'm not sure if it's correct to call these groups Al-Qaeda as such, because that depends what you mean by Al-Qaeda. From a threat perspective, in Europe and the United States, one is always worried about Al-Qaeda's capacity to carry out international terrorist attacks. But I'm not sure if these local affiliates that call themselves Al-Qaeda today, if they even are interested in carrying out this type of attack, because this is just one small part of what Al-Qaeda, always was doing. Al-Qaeda was also, especially after 2001, focused on capturing territory and over time ruling territories in the Muslim world, especially in conflict areas. So their territorial ambitions increased, and the ambition to carry out spectacular terrorist attacks far away, like in the United States, those ambitions decreased over time, and they were almost gone. By the time of bin Laden's death, they were almost gone already. Yeah.
So what do you think made the organization weak? Was it counter-terrorism measures or internal weaknesses, leadership problem? So what exactly happened?
Yes, it was everything. Of course, part counterterrorism measures that really weakened Al-Qaeda a lot. I would say the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, that was the main, sorry, I'm saying invasion, but I mean the US-led, US-led attack on Afghanistan in 2001. That was the main point in history where Al-Qaeda was severely weakened, because it went from being an organization that had a safe haven, they had freedom of movement, they had training camps, they could receive recruits from abroad that could freely pass the border into Afghanistan. That was a very prosperous time in Al-Qaeda's history. Al-Qaeda was at the peak of its strength and influence, in my opinion, in 2001. And then came the reaction to the 9/11 attacks that toppled the Taliban regime and started a so-called war on terror that severely weakened Al-Qaeda immediately, because they lost their bases, they lost their freedom of movement, and they lost many individuals, both in 2001, where the second in command, or the military chief of Al-Qaeda, was killed, and also later up until 2011, when bin Laden himself was killed. So by 2011, Al-Qaeda had lost a lot of its senior leaders already. But there were also internal weaknesses based on many things. I wouldn't say Al-Qaeda as such was had a self-destructive ideology or anything like that, but they had severe challenges just operating as a group after 2001 because of the lack of freedom of movement and the constant pressure, the counter-terrorism pressure from Pakistan and from internationally. So that restricted a lot what Al-Qaeda could do, and the leaders couldn't even meet in person. Some of them, like Osama bin Laden, probably never met the other leaders even after, at least after 2005 or 6. He was isolated in his house in Abbottabad, and he could only communicate via letters. And these letters could only be sent out like every few weeks or every month, not very frequently. So that was a big weakness, and that created a situation where the active Al-Qaeda affiliates, like Al-Qaeda in Iraq, they started acting on their own, and they basically, over time, they changed what Al-Qaeda originally stood for, and changed Al-Qaeda into something else, is also what I write about as a sort of main finding in my book, that Al-Qaeda was an organization that was focused on international terrorist attacks and fighting the United States, and sort of with the aim of uniting the Muslim world around this one cause, as they saw it, although that didn't work, as 9/11 showed. But that was the purpose, and then that gradually changed with the affiliates being the active parts of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda became also its affiliates, and the affiliates were very much focused on capturing territory locally and declaring Islamic states in their territories. And that happened in Iraq already in 2006. That's when the group called Al-Qaeda in Iraq changed their name to the Islamic State in Iraq. And some of the other affiliates, they were also very much wanting to declare Islamic states. And there were many discussions via letter between bin Laden and the other leaders, whether that was a good strategy or not. Bin Laden was generally against declaring an Islamic State, but the groups really wanted to do that because they had, they had the territory, they had some of the elements in place, and they had the ideology where having an Islamic State was the ultimate goal that they wanted to achieve, and they were also very much inspired by the affiliate in Iraq that had already declared a state. So that changed then. Then the Al-Qaeda leaders had no choice but to accept these narratives from the affiliates and to also start supporting the Islamic State narrative. And that wasn't a viable strategy at all, because groups like Al-Qaeda in Iraq, they were severely pushed back, and they created their actions in Iraq against the Shia Muslims and so on, their extreme violence. They created a backlash reaction against them from other Sunni militants. So Al-Qaeda in Iraq was very much beaten down and had almost lost by 2010. Before then, ISIS emerged later, but that was a particular opportunity that came up because of the Arab Spring revolutions and the start of the war in Syria and so on. So that they managed to come back, but that was not how the situation looked in 2010.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a long list of questions, and I really liked your book, but I will let the audience get a copy of this book and find out some answers to the questions themselves. So thank you so much for taking out time. And I understand it's been a long day for you and you have a very busy schedule. So we're going to wrap up here. And thank you once again for coming and joining our podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.